Okay, you can begin.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jahim Walker, and today I'll be presenting on Chapter 12 Power and Influence. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend class today, but with the power of technology, I'm still able to deliver this presentation to you all. This chapter explores the topic of leadership, power, and influence in detail. It opens with a consideration of charismatic and transformational leadership, two leadership styles that rely strongly on a leader's personal characteristics as a source of power. Then we examine what we mean by the terms power and influence, look at some sources and types of power, and outline ways leaders exercise power and influence through a political activity. Finally, we briefly consider some ethical aspects of using power and influence. Transformational and charismatic leadership. One of the key characteristics of both charismatic and transformational leadership is that they are based largely on the strength of the leader's personal power rather than a position of authority granted by an organization. One way to understand transformational leadership is to compare it with transactional leadership. Transactional leadership is defined as a transaction or exchange process between leaders and followers. The transactional leader recognizes followers' needs and desires, then clarifies how those needs and desires will be satisfied in exchange for meeting specified objectives or performing certain duties. Thus, followers receive rewards for job performance, whereas leaders benefit from the completion of tasks. Transactional leaders focus on the present and excel at keeping the organization running smoothly and efficiently. However, because transactional leaders involves a commitment to follow the rules, transactional leaders maintain stability within the organization rather than promoting change. In contrast, transformational leadership is characterized by the ability to bring about significant change in both followers and the organization. Transformational leaders have the ability to lead changes in an organization's vision, strategy, and culture, as well as promote innovation in products and technologies. Rather than just analyzing and controlling specific transaction with followers using rules, direction, and initiatives, transformational leaders focus on intangible qualities such as vision, shared values, and ideas in order to build relationship, give larger meaning to separate activities, and provide common ground to enlist followers in the change process. Leaders can learn to be transformational as well as transactional, but effective leaders exhibit both transactional and but effective leaders exhibit both transactional and transformational leadership patterns. However, some personality traits may make it easier for some leaders to display transformational leadership behaviors, such as the trait of agreeableness, emotional stability, a strong sense of emotional intelligence, and positive engagement with the world around them. Transformational leadership differs from transactional leadership in the following areas. Transformational leadership develop followers into leaders. So a transformational leader would arouse the awareness in followers of problems and issues and allow them the freedom to solve them and to work to meet the organizational goals in their own perspective way, as opposed to making them into mindless zombies that just want to follow every order you back at them. With the freedom, it will allow them to express their creativity and really and really think on their own. Secondly, transformational leadership evaluates the concern of followers from lower level physical needs to higher level psychological needs. So, lower level physical needs would be defined as safety and security, and higher level psychological needs would be self esteem and self actualization. So it is important that your lower level needs are met through adequate wages, safe working conditions, and other considerations. But as a transformational leader, you would also pay attention to each individual's need for group and development. So the leader would set examples and assign tasks, not only to meet the needs, but also to elevate the followers' needs and abilities to a higher level and link them to the organization mission. Thirdly, transformational leadership inspires followers to go beyond their own self interest for the good of the group. They motivate people not to just follow the leader personally, but to believe in the need for change and be willing to make personal sacrifices for the greater purpose of the mission. Fourthly, transformational leadership paints a vision of a desired future state and communicates it in a way that makes the pain of change worth the effort. So, the most significant role of a transformational leader would be to find a vision for the organization that is significantly better than the old one and enlist others in sharing the same dream. Change could only occur when the people have a sense of purpose as well as a desirable picture of where the organization is going. Without a clear cut vision or idea of the direction, there could never be no transformation. An example of a leader who reflects balance in both transactional and transformational leadership is Mike Eskew of UPS. So he spent his entire career as an engineer from 1972 and built up to the position of chairman and CEO. But as a CEO, he sees his most important role as helping people understand the vision and how they fit into the company. So when he visits our facility, he often tell employees what you do is noble and you make business better. So transformational leaders like Mike give people a chance to make significant contributions as well as recognize them for their accomplishments. Charismatic leadership. Charisma has been called a fire that ignites followers' energy and commitment, producing results above and beyond the call of duty. So, charismatic leaders have the ability to inspire and motivate people to do more than they would normally do despite the obstacle and personal sacrifice. Charismatic leaders have an emotional impact on people because they appeal to both the heart and the mind. They may speak emotionally about putting themselves on the line for the sake of a mission. They are perceived as people who persist in spite of great odds against them. They often emerge in troubled times, whether in society or organizations, because a strong, inspiring personality can help to reduce stress and anxiety among followers. So, used wisely and ethically, charisma can lift the entire organization's level of performance. Although charisma itself cannot be learned, there are aspects of charismatic leadership that anyone can use. For one thing, charisma comes from pursuing activities that you have a true passion for. Charismatic leaders are engaging their emotions in their everyday work life, which makes them energetic, enthusiastic, and attractive to others. Their passion galvanizes people to action. An example of charismatic leadership would be in times of war. We know in times of war, two sides fighting, people dying, lives on the line, families, brothers, etc., etc. So, what would make people go out and put their lives on the line with the chance of not coming back home. There would be somebody who would come and give a speech and boost the morale of the troops to give them a reason to fight for and a reason to die for. What makes a charismatic leader? So we'll compare distinguishing characteristics of a charismatic and a non-charismatic leader. So likableness. In a non-charismatic leader, they could just be likable, but with a charismatic leader, the likableness extends in where they'll be a hero to you and you'll try to imitate their actions. Trustworthiness. So charismatic leaders would earn your followers' trust by willing to incur great personal risk upon yourself. A good example would be Martin Luther King, who received death threats for him and his family mostly every day because of his civil rights movement. Relation to the status quo, a non-charismatic leader would try to maintain the status quo, whereas a charismatic leader would try to create an atmosphere of change. The future goals, the non-charismatic leader would have limited goals that is not too contradictory from the status quo, whereas a charismatic leader would have an idealized vision that is very contradictory from the status quo. Articulation. A non-charismatic leader would have a weak articulation of the goals and motivation to lead, whereas a charismatic leader would have strong and inspirational articulation. Articulation is basically the ability to communicate complex ideas and goals in a clear, compelling way so that everyone from the vice president to the janitor could understand and identify with the message. Competence. The non-charismatic leader would use any available means to achieve the goals, whereas a charismatic leader would use unconventional means to transcend and achieve the goals. Behavior. Non-charismatic leaders is usually conventional, just like a normal boss would be, whereas a charismatic leader would be unconventional. They often seem like oddballs or weird, but they exude such mystery that you're attracted to how they behave and present themselves. And lastly, influence. A non-charismatic leader influence when it comes from the position they have, whereas a charismatic leader, their source of influence come from personal characteristics rather than the position of authority. People would admire and respect and identify with the leader and want to be like them. One characteristic of charisma is that it could be a curse as well as a blessing. Charisma isn't always used to benefit the group, the organization, or society. It could be used for self serving purposes, which leads to deception, manipulation, and exploitation of others. Because charisma is emotional rather than logical or rational, it is risky and potentially dangerous. So, an example of this could be Adolf Hitler. He used his charisma to rally a group of supporters that committed mass genocide of different racial and ethnic groups. So, the only distinction between charisma that results in positive and negative outcomes would be the difference in personalized leaders and socialized leaders. Personalized charismatic leaders are characterized as self aggrandizing, non democratic, and exploitive, whereas socialized charismatic leaders are empowering, democratic, and supportive. So, personalized behavior is based on caring about the self, socialized behavior is based on the valuing of others. Leaders who have been consistently successful in improving organizational performance show a pattern of socialized behavior. Power and influence are highly important concepts in the study of leadership. Leadership relies on the use of power to get things done. Sometimes the terms power and influence are used synonymously, but there are distinctions between the two. Power is an intangible force in organizations. It cannot be seen, but its effects can be felt. Power is often defined as the ability of one person or department in an organization to influence other people to bring about desired outcomes or to do something they would otherwise not have done. Whereas influence is the effect a person's actions have on the attitudes, values, beliefs, or actions of others. Whereas power is the capacity to cause a change in a person, influence may be thought of as a degree of actual change. Although we usually think of power and influence as belonging to the leader, in reality, they result from the interaction of leaders and followers in specific situations. Followers may also influence a leader's behavior in any numbers of ways. Leaders can improve their effectiveness by understanding the various types and sources of power, as well as influence tactics they or their followers may use. Five types of leader powers. The five types of leader powers could be divided into two categories. The first three, legitimate, reward, and coercive power, may be all considered types of position power. A person's position in the organization determines what amount of power he or she has, particularly in regard to the ability to reward or punish subordinates to influence their behavior. Firstly, legitimate power, which is the authority granted from a formal position in an organization. For example, a person selected to be a supervisor, most workers will understand that they are obligated to follow their direction with respect to work activities. And since it is a higher position than theirs, they are somewhat forced to comply. Secondly, reward power, which is the kind of power that stems from the authority to bestow rewards on other people. These rewards could be pay increases or promotions. So, as a leader, it could use reward power to influence subordinates' behavior, such as employee of the month, which would be a position to an employee who does the most significant amount of work, and you reward them with a slight salary increase or a reward bonus. Thirdly, coercive power, which is the opposite of reward power and refers to the power to punish or recommend punishment. Superiors have coercive power when they have the right to fire or demote subordinates, criticize, or withdraw pay increase. The last two types of power are sources of personal power, expert power and referent power. So, firstly, expert power is power resulting from a leader's special knowledge or skill regarding task. So, when a leader is a true expert in a field, workers would normally go with the recommendations he provides because of his superior knowledge. A good example of this could be that you wouldn't hire a doctor to fix your sink or your plumbing. You would hire a plumber because he is specifically trained to do this. Secondly, referent power. This is the kind of power that comes from a leader's personality characteristics that command followers' identification, respect, and admiration so that they would want to mimic the leader. When workers admire a supervisor because of the way he or she deal with them, the influence is based on referent power. Responses to the use of power. So we know that a leader could use the various type of power mentioned before to influence people, but depending on how they use this power, it could have three distinctive outcomes, such as compliance, resistance, and commitment. So when people successfully use position power, the response is compliance. Compliance means that people follow the directions of the person with power, whether or not they agree with those directions. The problem with compliance is that the followers may just do enough work to satisfy the leader and may not contribute their full potential or put in their best effort in the job at hand. In addition, if the use of positional power, especially coercion, exceeds a level people consider legitimate, people may resist the attempt to influence, leading to resistance. So resistance means that employees will deliberately try to avoid carrying out instructions or they will attempt to disobey orders. Thus, the effectiveness of leaders who rely solely on positional power is limited. Followers' response, most often generated by personal power, such, such as expert and referent power, is commitment. Commitment means that followers adopt the leader's viewpoint and enthusiastically carry out instructions. Needless to say, commitment is preferred over compliance or resistance. Although compliance alone may not be enough, commitment is particularly important when the leader is promoting change. The role of dependency. So, from personal experience, we know that we should know that a person that has control over something that others want and need gains power. A simple example is a high school quarterback graduating at a time where few excellent quarterbacks is coming out of school. The quarterback would be in high demand and would be courted by numerous colleges who would want them. One of the key aspects of power is that it is defined as a function of dependence. So the greater individual B dependence on individual E, the greater the power individual E will have over individual B. So people in organizations have power because people depend on them for information, resources, cooperation, and so forth. The more people depend on someone, the greater the person's power. The nature of dependency relationships between leaders and subordinates in organizations could fluctuate depending on the economic status, such as when unemployment is low and jobs are plentiful, people feel less dependent on their supervisors, and managers are more dependent on employees because they are hard to replace. Vice versa would be when jobs are hard to come by and unemployment is high. Organizational leaders have greater power over employees because most people are dependent on the organization for their livelihood. When jobs are scarce, it is easier for leaders to get by relying on their positional power, but they wouldn't get the full benefit of the employees' enthusiasm and commitment. So, dependency within organizations is related to a person's control over resources. Resources could include jobs, reward, financial support, expertise, knowledge, materials, information, or time. As illustrated in the diagram, leaders and organizations have more control and power when resources are high on the three characteristics: importance, scarcity, and no substitutability. So, importance, people in organization perceive the resource to be important. That is, if nobody wants what you've got, it's not going to create dependency. Resources could be important for a variety of reasons as to whether the resource is easy or difficult to obtain. A resource that is difficult or expensive to acquire is more valuable and creates more dependency than one that is widely available. A good example of this could be copper versus gold. Copper is widely used and widely available, and it's used in the most basic household appliances and products, such as wires, whereas gold would be more expensive because it doesn't come by so often. And thirdly, no substitutability means that leaders or employees with control over resources with no viable substitute will have more power. These resources may include knowledge and expertise, as well as people with higher power. For example, an executive secretary that has daily access to the CEO might have more power than middle managers who must compete for a few minutes of the CEO's time. Sources of leader power in organizations. An understanding of dependency and control over resources provides the foundation for examining several sources of leader power in organizations. In organizations, additional sources of power and influence have been identified that are not linked to specific persons or position, but to the role leaders play in the overall functioning of organization. Sources of power in this regard are interdepartmental dependency, control over information, centrality, and coping with uncertainty. So, firstly, interdepartmental dependency. Materials, resources, and information may flow between departments in one direction. In such cases, leaders in the department receiving resources will have less power than those in the department that provides them. For example, consider the case of leaders at a cigarette factory. One might expect that the production department would be more powerful than the maintenance department. But that was not the case in a cigarette plant near Paris. The production of cigarette was a routine process, so the machines was automated. On the other hand, maintenance department workers and their leaders were responsible for the repair of the automated machinery, which was a complex task. Because the maintenance department had the ability to fix unpredictable assembly line breakdowns, production managers became dependent on maintenance, and maintenance leaders called the shots about machine repair and assembly line maintenance. Secondly, control over information. Control over information, which involves both access to information and control over how and to whom it is distributed, is an important source of power for leaders. Most leaders recognize that information is a primary business resource and that by controlling what information is collected, how it is interpreted, and how it is shared, they can influence how decisions are made. To some extent, Access to information is determined by a person's position in the organization. So the top leaders typically have access to more information than lower level supervisors or the employees do. However, low level employees who have exclusive access to information needed by leaders to make decisions gain power as a result. For example, a top executive may be dependent on the production manager for analyzing and interpreting complex operations data. Thirdly, organization centrality. Centrality reflects a leader's or department's role in the primary activity of an organization. One measure of centrality is the extent to which the work of the leader's department affects the final output of the organization. For example, a company such as Intel, which is heavily technology oriented, engineers have a high degree of power because the organization depends on them to maintain the technical superiority of its products. And lastly, coping with uncertainty. The environment can change swiftly and create uncertainty and complexity for leaders. In the face of uncertainty, little information is available to leaders on appropriate courses of action. Leaders in departments that cope well with this uncertainty will increase their power. For example, when a market research personnel accurately predicts changes in the demand for new products, they would gain power and prestige because they have reduced a critical uncertainty. Another example would be leaders in industrial relations department may gain power by helping the organization deal with uncertainties created by labor union. Increasing power through political activity. Another aspect of power is that it isn't enough to be performing central activities or coping with organizational uncertainties. One's effort must also be recognized as important by others. People who want to increase their power make sure their activities are visible and appreciated by others. Acquiring and using power is largely a political process. Politics involves activities to acquire, develop, and use power and other resources to obtain desired future outcomes where there is uncertainty or disagreement about choices. Politically skillful leaders strive to understand others' viewpoints, needs, desires, and goals and use their understanding to influence people to act in ways that help the leader accomplish his or her goals for the team or organizations. Leaders at most organizations engage in some degree of political activity aimed at influencing government policies because government choices represent a critical source of uncertainty for businesses as well as non-profit organizations. Uncertainty and conflict are natural in organizations, and politics is a mechanism used for accomplishing things that cannot be handled purely through formal policies or position power. The appropriate use of power and politics to get things done is an important aspect of leadership. One way leaders increase their power is by seeking greater responsibility, such as serving on committees or volunteering for difficult projects. This often enables them to make connections with powerful people in the organization and build their reputation among those people. The term for this is usually friends in higher places, and when a lower level leader has this, their own power is increased. Another political approach is called impression management, which means people seek to control how others perceive them, often creating an impression of greater power as well as helping them gain more power. Impression management may include a wide variety of tactics, such as subtle name dropping, can give the impression that a leader associates with high status people. Likewise, flattery is a form of impression management that can help a person appear to be perceived and pleasant. These political tactics can be helpful when they enable others to perceive a leader's value to the organization. However, they can also backfire if a leader is perceived as being insecure, dishonest, or arrogant. Tactics for a certain leader influence. So, this topic discusses how leaders use their power to implement decisions, facilitate change, and pursue organizational goals. Some power moves are rejected by followers, particularly if they are seen to be self serving. So, leaders would have to determine the best approach that is most likely to influence others by considering the individuals, groups, and situations involved in. Leaders frequently use a combination of influence strategies, and people who use a wider variety of tactics are typically perceived as having greater power and influence. We'll discuss the 7 principles for a certain leader influences. Notice that most of these involve the use of personal power rather than relying solely on positional power or the use of rewards and punishments. So, the 7 principles for asserting leader influence. Firstly, we have use rational persuasion. So, the most frequently used influence tactic is rational persuasion, which means using fact, data, and logical arguments to persuade others that a proposed idea or request is the best way to complete a task and accomplish a desired goal. It can be effective whether the influence attempt is directed upward toward superiors, downward toward subordinates, or horizontally because most people have faith in fact and analysis. Rational position is most effective when a leader has technical knowledge and expertise related to the issue, basically, expert power. Oration is most effective when a leader has technical knowledge and expertise related to the issue, basically, expert power, although referent power is also used. Often, some parts of rational argument cannot be backed up with facts and figures, so people have to believe in the leader's credibility to accept his or her argument. Secondly, make people like you. We all know that it's easier to say yes to someone we like rather than to someone we don't like. When a leader shows concern for others, demonstrates trust and respect, and treats people fairly, people are more likely to want to help and support the leader by doing what he or she asks. In addition, most people will like a leader who makes them feel good about themselves. Leaders never underestimate the importance of praise. Thirdly, rely on the rule of reciprocity. So, as mentioned earlier, we discussed the role of dependency and how leaders gain power by having something that others value. A primary way to turn power into influence is to share what you have, whether it be time, resources, services, or emotional support. There is a near universal feeling among people that others should be paid back for what they do in one form or another. This is the unwritten law of reciprocity. This is the unwritten law of reciprocity. Means that leaders who do favors for others can expect others to do favors for them in return. Fourthly, develop allies. Reciprocity also plays an important role in developing a network of allies, people who can help the leader accomplish his or her goal. Leaders can influence others by taking the time to talk with followers and other leaders outside of formal meetings to further understand their needs and concerns, as well as explain problems and describe the leader's point of view. Some leaders expand their networks through the hiring, transfer, and promotion process. Identifying and placing in key positions people who are sympathetic to the desired outcome of the leader can help achieve the leader's goals. However, if power building is perceived as self-serving, key people may become alienated. Our fifth principle would be ask for what you want. Another way to have influence is to make a direct appeal by being clear about what you want and asking for it. If leaders do not ask, they seldom receive. Our sixth principle, remember the principle of scarcity. The principle means that people usually want more of what they can't have. When things are less available, they become more desirable. Leaders can learn to frame their requests or offers in such a way as to highlight the unique benefits and exclusive information being provided. One approach is to selectively release information that is not broadly available and supports the leader's ideas and proposals. Letting people know they're getting a sneak peek at information captures their interest and make them more likely to support the leader's position. And last of the principles is extend formal authority with expertise and credibility. So the final principle for asserting influence is the leader's legitimate authority in organizations. Legitimate authorities are in a position to be particularly influential. However, research has found that the key to successful use of formal authority is to be knowledgeable, credible, and trustworthy. Managers who become known for their expertise, who are honest and straightforward with others, and who inspire trust can exert greater influence than those who simply try to issue orders. In addition, effective leaders keep the six previous influences in mind, realizing that influence depends primarily on personal rather than positional power. By understanding the importance of rational persuasion, liking and friendship, reciprocity, networks of alliances, direct appeal, and scarcity, leaders can extend the power of their formal position and strengthen their influence over others. And the final topic for this chapter is ethical considerations in using power and politics. So, leadership is an opportunity to use power and influence to accomplish important organizational goals, but power can also be abused. Remember, earlier we talked about personalized versus social leaders. The distinction refers primarily to the approach of the use of power. Personalized leaders are typically selfish, impulsive, and exercise power for their own self-centered needs and interests rather than for the good of the organization. Whereas socialized leaders exercise power in the service of higher goals that will benefit others and the organization as a whole. One specific area in which unethical use of power is of increasing concern for organizations is sexual harassment. People in organizations depend on one another and especially on the leaders for many resources, including information, cooperation, and even their jobs. When access to these resources seem to be dependent on granting sexual favors or putting up with sexually intimidating or threatening comments, the person in a dependent position is being personally violated, whether or not the leader actually withholds the resources, partly in response to pressures from courts. Many organizations are developing policies and procedures that protect individuals from sexual harassment on the job and offer mechanisms for reporting complaints. Sexual harassment is not just unethical, it is illegal, and it is a clear abuse of power. However, there are many situations in organizations that are not so clear cut, and leaders may sometimes have difficulty differentiating ethical from unethical uses of power and politics. These are some guidelines that could guide ethical actions. First and foremost is the question of whether the action is motivated by self interest or whether it is consistent with organization goals. Once a leader answers this primary question, there are several other questions that could help determine whether a potential influence action is ethical, including: does the action respect the rights of the individual and the groups affected by it? Does the action meet the standards of fairness and equality? And would you wish others to behave in the same way if you are affected by the same action? If a leader answers these questions honestly, they can serve as a guide to whether an intended act is ethical. In the complex world of organizations, there will always be situations that are difficult to interpret. The most important point is for leaders to be aware of ethical responsibilities, of having power, and take care to use their power to help rather than to harm others. Leaders should think not in terms of getting their own way, but rather in terms of building long term productive relationships that can achieve goals and benefit the entire organization. So, a quick summary of what was discussed in the chapter. This chapter looked at how leaders use power and political processes to get things done. Two leadership styles that rely strongly on a leader's personal characteristics as a source of power and transformational and charismatic leadership. All leaders use power and politics to influence people and accomplish goals. A key aspect of power is that it is a function of dependency, which is related to a person's control over resources. Power is acquired, developed, and exercised through political activities. And lastly, ethical leaders use power to serve the organizational goals, respect the rights of individuals and groups, and strive to be fair in their dealings and others. And this brings us to the end of the presentation. I hope that it was informative as well as understandable. Thank you all for your attention and time.
All right, if there are no questions, I'll stop the recording.